We got Daredevil Born Again episode 4 breakdown. Check it out, boys. They were cooking, bro. That was so bad.
From the return of the Punisher Frank Castle to Matt's colorful vigilante wardrobe to Skrulls, let's break down
Scroll? I didn't even know that was a scroll. What the hell?
celebrating Daredevil Born Again with
Oh, well, he mentioned it, I guess.
and stressing our way through these episodes with these custom pillows, also available on our merch store. Really the best way to
And they trying to get it up for real.
in the morgue on the belongings of Hector Ayala found on the body at the time of his death. His wallet, smartphone, a knife, keys, watch, wedding ring, and his
Surprised they didn't try to hide it.
and you'll notice the beads of his necklace include a red, white, and blue pattern, which Hector must have customized as a reference to his Puerto Rican heritage. I know red, white, and blue are the colors on a lot of flags, but come on, the dude wasn't French. I also appreciate that we opened this episode with the vigilante mask, just to close with Matt revealing he has 5 vigilante masks. Matt
So which one he gonna choose?
Despite the bullet being potentially custom, no casing was found. Matt senses some footsteps.
How did you get in here?
I want to see my uncle, Hector Ayala.
So this is Hector's niece, whom we saw in the courtroom in episode 3, named Angela Del Toro. In the comics, Hector has 2 sisters.
She's gonna be in Young Avengers.
Angela Del Toro, and Angela is a Wildest daughter. Angela was introduced in Brian Michael Bendis' Daredevil comics in 2003 as Hector's niece, an FBI agent who ends up taking on the power of the White Tiger from her uncle's amulets when he's falsely accused of murder. Angela is the 4th White Tiger in the comics before her aunt, Hector's sister Ava, ends up taking on the mantle as
She's gonna be the second one.
Angela retires. Angela is played by actress Camila Rodriguez. Now, there was another Angela Del Toro mentioned in Jessica Jones season 1 episode 6, some private investigator in New York City that we never see. Assuming Marvel plans to confirm all of these shows as MCU canon, this is just one of many logical overlaps, and I guess we can say that that PI was just some other Angela Del Toro. Got into this morgue, and the mortician's like, hey, how'd you get in here? It tells us that this girl is already at least pretty skilled, or just ballsy, and we should note that with Yusuf Khan set to appear in a later episode, it's very possible that Kamala Khan might show up in this season as well. And since we know that Kamala is building a team of young Avengers or champions in New York City,
She gonna go for the White Tiger.
yet another hero as a future White Tiger who could be a kid hero in that lineup. As Matt gives Angela his arm, we focus on the White Tiger mask and amulet in the evidence bag as if these items are calling to her. This episode's director, Jeffrey Natchez,
She gonna try it on.
Brandon Davis said there was an alternate cut of this episode that would have shown the tiger amulet's eyes illuminating when Angela got too close to it. The way she sobs to
That would have been cool if they did that.
and that no one's gonna do anything, she's absolutely being set up to take on this mantle herself. The question now is, could Matt Murdock take on the role as a mentor daddy to these young vigilantes? He already defended the kid in the spider costume that the mayor singled out in his inaugural speech, though I don't know if Matt remembers that that kid was Peter Parker from Queens after Doctor Strange's spell. In our recent Spider-Man
Probably not.
Sadie Sink was cast as Gwen Stacy, and with the possible shout out to Miles Morales in
I thought they said no.
Morales, Jefferson
That she was gonna be something else.
in the comics, and it was Morales in Across the Spider-Verse. We could just be getting a lot of young heroes being set up in the orbit of Matt Murdock. We see graffiti of Wilson Fisk that we saw in past episodes.
Kingpin.
Muse etched as a signature along the bottom. All the Muse murals
Saw a little bit of him.
done by David Mack, who's one of the most talented artists who has worked on Daredevil comic titles. He also wrote for Echo and worked on Jessica Jones and Captain America Winter Soldier. And some fun details are in the design here. The left side and then the shirt on the right side and the crown all have an inlay of the backside art of an American $1 bill. The words also have an
He was cooking.
King is formed by the Empire State Building. The dollar bill art depiction of the Masonic Pyramid is deconstructed in a particular way to match the New York City skyline, which also might be Muse's way of suggesting that he's kind of deconstructing the conspiratorial powers that secretly run the world. Overall, this mural shows the duality of Wilson Fisk, his white-clad, smiling public servant mask, which deceptively winks, and his true, scowling, black-clad, monstrous nature, which
The two versions of the Kingpin, bro.
also connects to the idea of Matt Murdock's world on fire, the way he perceives the violent world that he described to Claire Temple in season 1 of Daredevil. So this right side is
Excuse me.
Wilson Fisk that Matt Murdock sees, and this villainous, violent, cheap day Fisk is the one we end this episode with.
You had Adam there, bro. I told ya.
Mural that Jessica broke down last week, also signed by Muse in the bottom right. point. The teeth of the skull are formed by the Empire State Building, the Statue of Liberty, and the Chrysler Building. We have to assume that Bastion just walks these streets and observes everything that's going down, including the corrupt cops who reappropriate Frank Castle's sigil as their own symbol to try to justify their killing.
Shake my head.
So triggered,
They're gonna get whooped.
Bastion Muse's way of mocking those cops for getting too trigger happy when vigilantes or lawyers or the media make them look bad. So Muse, showing an impressive amount of strength, lifts an incapacitated guy down the tracks.
He was sucking the blood out of them to paint, bro. That's crazy.
This season, and he looks very much like Ron Garney's design in Charles Soule's 2016 Daredevil run, with full body canvas bag covering pinned together, a knit beanie, suspenders, and some bloody eye holes forming tear streaks down the face. The difference here is we can see Bastion's eyes underneath. The Soule Garney run of the comics never reveals what Muse's name is. He's just always kind of a mystery Banksy figure. So for this series to start with Bastion as a stalker figure at Heather Glenn's book reading, and with
That's gonna be crazy. He's probably gonna try to go for her.
it's just pretty troubling for Heather.
That's when Daredevil gonna find out about him.
Looking out at the passing darkness, and then for a
No, that's crazy, bro.
yikes! Between that and Officer Shanahan popping like a circus balloon filled with blood on another train car, I would just start taking taxis. This episode was written by
Yeah.
Jesse Wigatow. David Feige is not related to Kevin Feige. He's a lawyer, a consultant, and a TV writer on a number of procedural shows who was clearly brought
That's
in
crazy.
to handle all the legal
They're not related, but they got the same last name.
on the deterrence legal theory with stealing the fiddle battle. That said, several of the scenes in this episode, including Frank Castle, any scenes
That's not a common last name either.
Vanessa Fisk, any scenes with Matt on his rooftop, any scenes with Kirsten McDuffie, and we're pretty sure Fisk's final scene with Adam were all written and all shot after the creative overhaul, and probably not part of the original version of this episode, which might be why episode 4 feels the most stitched together of the episodes we've seen so far. Daniel Blake parties Zemo style with BB Urich and her friend. They urge Daniel to keep partying with them, but Daniel says he has
She was trying to get that information out of him, and she did.
which he says has a dope recycling idea to decrease garbage turnout. This, we will see later, is how B. Urich publishes the Mayor Garbage story. In episode 2, I wondered if the reason the Pim Van Dyne Foundation sponsored the New Year's Eve party was part of a bid to shrink the garbage of the city. Maybe this other tech company is another person who put in that bid.
I mean, that would be a good idea, honestly.
Tiger with vigilante justice written on there. This one is also signed Muse at the bottom. So Muse isn't just calling out the corrupt people. Muse feels bad for the masked vigilantes, and maybe that's how he justifies what he does. BB jokingly calls him Captain Planet, referring to the early 90s pro-environmental kids show that feels more like a reference written by one of these elder millennial writers on the show, rather than a reference an actual 25-year-old would make. Like, be honest, if you're under 25 and you're watching this video, do you know who Captain Planet was?
Hell nah.
Staten, you don't need Manhattan, which means that when this kid was younger, his family's commute might have been disrupted by your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, who is involved in one of those ferries being split in half in Spider-Man Homecoming. So maybe he added the shout out to the Spider-Man in Mayor Fisk's speech. We have a really fun transition that takes us across the street through a taxi where we see Leroy is being held for stealing the fiddle battle. Matt fiddles with his broken Daredevil mask horn on his rooftop.
He fiending to get back into it, bro.
He prepares to take back up his Daredevil life. If this rooftop
You're gonna have to get back to it.
it's because it was part of the reshoots that were done later. They just wanted to set up this rooftop setting that Matt ends the episode on, which is why his phone call with McDuffie sending Matt to the Leroy Bradford case is just a little redundant. Kirsten says she's underwater on the Madison case, and it's not a nod to Madison with 2 Y's, but not where you think. So wondering if the Madison case could be a David Feige lawyer nod to the Madison case in A Few Good Men, which was the landmark integration case that Kathy's dad tried that gave Tom Cruise Kathy such a chip on his shoulder to prove himself in that movie. I only just bring it up because I think anyone who writes legal dramas probably quotes Aaron Sorkin's script for A Few Good Men in their sleep. In couples therapy, Heather Glenn wants to talk to Fisk and Vanessa about this affair with Adam. Oh, poor Adam. Vanessa said that she was drawn to Adam's hands.
It's probably been there for a good couple months too.
Referring to the Swiss-born German artist Paul Klee in the early 20th century. Maybe it's just because I've been working on a Tenet analysis for the Deep Dive channel for the past 6 months, but I'm reminded of the affair Sater's wife, Kat, has with an artist named Arepo, whom she met during her art appraisal work, an artist whom Sater probably also physically tortured. Vanessa says Adam wasn't part of her husband's world.
What world is that?
The corrupt world.
Business.
The fact that they say it together shows that they both have a stake in this crime business, and in fact, Vanessa is really the one calling the shots. Vanessa keeps blaming Fisk.
How it is, bro.
He recovered for a few months after Maya Lopez shot him, followed by his trip to Oklahoma, as a reason for her affair, and she connects it with some abandonment issues that she feels from her father going away on business, drinking, gambling, and her judging her mom for her weakness. Fisk says that he did confront Adam. We have seen his bloody knuckles in the past few episodes, but he just says
Told ya.
dialogue. And just as he and Vanessa said business in sync, they answered this question together too.
And where's Adam?
If you know Kingpin,
I don't know.
You know he had Adam somewhere.
As Jessica pointed out last week, the date in the lower right corner lists the year as 2024, so they clearly just used a clapboard that they had on set during the reshoot period. The S7 means that this would be season 7 of the BB Report series, which is a pretty long run. Well done, BB. Now, the old man being interviewed here says he loves vigilantes. He's the same guy who said a few episodes back that if someone came up to him, he'd take out his piece and shoot them in the head. It kind of reminds me of Nick Fury's dad, you know, that he mentioned in Captain America the Winter Soldier, how he would carry a brown paper bag with him every day. It was just a nice old man, but he would show people what's inside, and there was a loaded gun in there. Matt meets Leroy Bradford, who lets out a few ableist remarks about Matt's blindness before we get this exchange that mentions Fiddle Faddle Camera Corn more times than we have to say a brand's name in a sponsor section.
5 boxes of Fiddle Faddle caramel corn.
Caramel corn.
Caramel corn.
Caramel corn.
Caramel corn.
They better have got that sponsor, bro.
Food up front weeks earlier, and then he says this.
Could it have been a scroll?
Nope.
So just a reminder that this is all
That's a good way to get out of it, though.
when then President James Ritson
Maybe.
war on all extraterrestrials on the planet, including the Skrull shapeshifters. And this is further proof that these scenes with Leroy, I think, were shot back in 2023, the previous version of the show, before Secret Invasion came out, and before Marvel Studios apparently decided to pretend Secret Invasion didn't happen, considering President Ritson
Since it was so bad.
and any of the White House politics in Captain America Brave New World. But the current status of the Skrulls in the MCU was shown in the Marvels film when the Kree leader Dar-Ben attacked the Skrull colony on Tarnax 4, which was led by Emperor Drogi. Carol, Kamala, and Monica saved some of the Skrulls, and Valkyrie took those survivors to some safe haven. If that
I forgot all about that movie, bro.
would have been in open defiance of President Ritson's order, and considering other new Asgard residents like Light Elves were causing legal issues in the She-Hulk series, it wouldn't surprise me if Matt came across the Skrulls in his work too. I just gotta hand it to Leroy for thinking a Skrull would pose as him, then grab 5 boxes of Fiddle Faddle where he was on camera, and then when he wasn't on camera, plant those
Trying to frame him.
security guard and the cops to find. Matt meets the prosecutor, Sofia Ozola. Now, there was a woman named Sofia of Hell's Kitchen, a Serbian national
Shit.
with militant background in the 2010 Black Panther, The Man Without Fear run.
Daredevil has another one, bro.
Prosecutors basically
He got other hus.
which Matt calls a discredited penal philosophy. According to the National Institute of Justice, prison sentences are unlikely to prevent future crimes, and various studies have shown that minimum sentencing guidelines have led to excessive incarceration rates that are really just designed to fatten the bottom lines for these for-profit prisons across this country, and this policy doesn't really stop criminals from committing future crimes. Still, it's pretty wild for Matt to try to argue the whole basis of the American criminal justice system over one case of Fiddle Faddle theft, especially a guy who mocked him repeatedly for being blind before Leroy had his sad monologue.
Bro, I would have just been like, hey, you could just get whatever, bro.
How big-hearted of a spirit law fighter that Matt is. I bet his devil ears heard Leroy's tummy rumbling. Thank you to BetterHelp for sponsoring this video. Relationships are complicated.
What a way to bring it in.
Friends can help himself. He's made us a couple of therapists, 7,000 strength in the 6 month of therapy. Matt mentioned
Need me a sponsor, bro.
Day, the event that Fisk goes to later. Now, Latvian Heritage Day isn't a known, recognized holiday in New York City of our world. There are other holidays that Latvian Americans celebrate. He says that he smelled the honey cake on her breath. He also charmed Sophia by saying the term for the crime, petit larceny, comes from the French petit, meaning little. And when you start talking French, you know what you're trying to get with that. And
Hey. She is feeling him.
like hating to see him leave, but loving to see him walk away. As Matt demonstrated when he sparred Jen Walters in Los Angeles, we are seeing kind of the 1-2 punch of Matt Murdock's legal expertise. Perry Mason by day, Cherry Mason by night. Matt
He get busy quick.
Who testified against Hector Ayala. Powell's face mostly healed since the last episode. Powell says everyone in his family wears a badge, and Matt hears Powell's heart beating true, as Powell says he had nothing to do with Ayala's death. Still a dirtbag, though. Fisk brings Daniel, Buck, and Sheila out to the port in the Red Hook area.
Still corrupt, though.
He has long neglected industrial development. He has a model showing a number of shipping cranes, and fun fact, shipping cranes like these in the Oakland port in the San Francisco Bay Area are what inspired the artists on George Lucas's team for the Empire Strikes Back designs of the AT-ATs. Really, what Fisk seems to be trying to do by
That's funny.
utilizing the shipping center in Red Hook is to expand his own Fisk shipping interests to international and bi-coastal ports, especially after Maya Lopez bombed his Brooklyn train yard and shipping center in the Echo series. Sheila wants to slow play the project and go through all the proper channels and the red tape, while Daniel is ready to fast track it. Buck stays behind to update Fisk on the drama among the 5 families that we saw playing out in episode 3, saying that the problems in Red Hook will continue until the heads are sentenced or they die. And since those 5 families roll up to Vanessa, I assume this is going to lead to some further strains between Fisk and his wife. Leroy says that even a 10-day sentence is too much because the last time he did time, he missed his appointment for food stamps, and he had to
I mean,
from dumpsters. And he brings up a really good point about the
yeah.
of defunding funding social welfare programs versus continuing public funding for prisons.
They're willing to spend 5 times more to lock me up than they're willing to
That's
spend
crazy,
to
bro.
feed me.
So I know hearing so much about the fiddle faddle
They don't be trying to help people out.
episode, but it has to be a seemingly petty larceny issue so that we can see why such a small thing would matter so much to someone. So here's where the episode takes a turn, and we cut abruptly to Mayor Fisk.
That was funny. He was ready to go.
To these school kids singing Starship's 1985 We Built This City. What? So Starship is having a moment right now. They just used this same song in Paradise on Hulu, and their other big song, Nothing's Gonna Stop Us Now, was just featured in the Super Bowl trailer for Thunderbolts. And both Hulu and Disney Plus are of course owned by Disney, so I'm sure it was just like a company-wide license buyout. But at first I found it insane that an elementary school would have their kids singing a Starship song, followed by a Latvian group singing the same song in Latvian, until, you know, those of us who do rock.
That's enough to crash out.
Might have been Mayor Fisk's
That bad singing.
what YMCA was for Trump's 2024 campaign. I will say that Starship's song is one of the lesser mid-80s nostalgic rock ballads that were trying to pay respect to the roots of rock and its importance to all of American culture. Its music video is completely nonsensical and stupid. I think the track was used here to show how Fisk thinks he is building an elaborate city, but having no sense of what foundation that city was built on. Like he fashions himself a Fiorello LaGuardia, but he is not. Meanwhile, Daniel shows Sheila the blog that BB Urick wrote about what Daniel told her at the club the night before.
He snitched on himself. He should have just let it go, bro.
In this article, you see that BB's angle is that by cutting the red tape and working with big tech, Fisk is disrupting the sanitation unions, and you can't be anti-union. And I love this. The article says published at 5:47 a.m. And Daniel
She was ready.
until 4:30 or 5. So that means BB must have literally rushed home, wrote up this article, probably have
She had that thing on the phone.
like if she wrote it and then sent it to publish, like scheduling the post, she would not have scheduled it for 5:47. She would have scheduled it for like 6 o'clock. I'm telling you, as someone who has run online digital publishing and content management systems. So it's amazing that BB got this up with 0 typos. Also, the thumbnail art for this article shows a bunch of rubble, and it looks like New York City's Flatiron Building, which was the building used for the Daily Bugle. The rubble is piled pretty high. It could be like a stock image from the Battle of New York. I also like that circle with Fisk using some New Rockstar's thumbnail design principles there. Also, I'm sorry to do this, but if this is Lincoln Middle School, why do some of these kids look 13 and other kids look like they're 7-year-olds who wandered in from elementary school across the street? Now, if you are one of these child actors watching this video, it is not your fault. You sing like an angel. Well done. But the casting team of the show clearly didn't give this much thought. And of course, as with any group shot of children, inevitably half of them are looking directly into the camera. Like, check this out. We got these two.
I mean, it's kids. Who cares?
And then you got this kid who's like, I'm in driver's ed. Look, I get it. In school choirs, you do mixed grades sometimes, but you know, just some of these kids are way too young for middle school. Also, they place Mayor Fisk in the tiniest chair.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to do a photo op. Clearly,
Bruh.
this chair is smaller than all the other chairs in this room that the adults are sitting in, and smaller than any chair any average middle schooler would sit in. This is clearly a kindergartner's chair, so it's kind of like the middle
Right.
school was like, quick, get the smallest chair you can find so our mayor feels like a giant sitting in it. Elementary school across the street, bring one of your tiny chairs for Mayor Fatass. When Mayor
Hey,
Fatass
yo.
the camera at a low angle, making him look towering.
Now for our next one.
No, 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 no. Ready to get up out of there.
Kind of like, and now, Mr. Mayor, this random group of 6-year-olds and 13-year-olds will sing Foreigners. I want to know what love is. I've gotta take a little time. Fisk gets the hell away from this school, going to the Latvian Cultural Center because Sheila says Latvian Americans are an important voting bloc in New York City. For reference, there are only about 8,000 Latvians living in New York City, a city with a population of over 8 million people, making that a 1/10 of 1%. By comparison,
I mean,
there
it's
are nearly
still
60,000
something, though.
Puerto Ricans living in New York City, comprising about 6.7% of the
Damn.
population. But that didn't stop Mayor Fisk from encouraging people to gun down Hector Ayala from the Heights. So, you know, priorities. Sheila, get it together. But this Latvian cultural group sings We Built This City in Latvian. Fisk cannot escape what is widely considered one of the worst rock songs. I'm not afraid to say it. It's catchy, but it makes no sense. I don't know why the Latvians are so important in this episode. My thinking is that maybe the Latvians are one of the 5 families, and that this could all be setting up a gang conflict later. I hope that's the case. We should also note that some scenes in The Falcon and the Winter Soldier were set in Latvia. To be clear, this is not a Latveria thing. Latveria is a fictional fictional country that's actually implied to be in a different part of Europe than the Baltic states. I also know that actor Mark Geller was credited in this episode as Carlos Urbe, who was the first bishop of the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Latvia in the 1920s. His name caught my eye because Mark Geller is also the actor who plays the mysterious Lumen Company founder Keir Egan on Severance. So I'm just wondering if there was more to this Latvian Heritage Day subplot that was removed from the episode during reshoots, but that they still had to credit Geller. Something weird was going on here, folks. But the screaming that Mayor Fisk wishes he could have unleashed on the kids or at the Latvian cultural
Yeah, he was ready to go crash out on them, bro. That's why he crashed out. They were trying him all episode long.
But Daniel owns up to being the source of the leak, saying that he was out till around 5 with being taking tequila and ketamine. And maybe it's just Daniel admitting that he doesn't deserve this job, and Fisk feeling that he's getting his fill of boy slapping with Adam, that he suddenly shifts to compartmentalizing his anger and forgiving Daniel. As we'll see at the end of this episode, he admits that forgiveness is a form of love in his deluded worldview, but he does place his hand on the shoulder in the same kind of threatening gesture that Bane does to Ben Mendelsohn in The Dark Knight Rises. Fisk says,
In the fullness of time, you'll make a better man.
The fullness of time actually comes from Galatians. But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his son, born of woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law, so that we might receive adoption as sons. Some believe that Daniel Blake could be being set up on the show as a figure similar to Richard Fisk, the Rose, Wilson, and Vanessa.
Richard Fisk.
Now, throughout this episode, we have been seeing garbage bags.
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. They kind of look alike.
Which isn't entirely uncommon in New York City, but now this BB report interstitial confirms it is a result of Mayor Fisk's conflict with the sanitation workers union. Matt returns to the place Hector was gunned down and uses his hearing to track an empty bottle of scotch rolling down the hill to the sewer gutter where anything on this path would have rolled, and so that's where he finds the custom bullet casing of the bullet that killed Hector. Then we get some generic establishing shots of New York, which seem to be being used in the editing here as visual buffers to transition us into this new sequence that seems to be inserted into the episode after the reshoots. I only mention it because the bullet casing in the earlier shot does not seem to have the Punisher skull logo on it when Matt finds it in the sewer, but it does very clearly when he shows it to Frank.
Yeah, I thought it did. It's probably on the other side.
And then takes his elevator where he's being reflected in a mirror that probably also has a security camera behind it. Matt follows some utility tunnels, passing this sign for telephone company personnel from Knickerbocker Village Management.
He found him a little too easy.
Castle lives in the basement beneath Knickerbocker Village, which is a housing development in New York's Two Bridges area on the Lower East Side. The notes of John Paisano's theme from the Netflix era return as Matt approaches this room. And just hearing that music has been a table setting to gear us up for the return of Frank Castle. Berthal, who we should note first joined Charlie Cox, Matt Murdock on
He's gonna whoop him, bruh.
18th, 2016, when the 13 episodes of Daredevil Season 2 hit Netflix. So with this episode of Daredevil Born Again coming out on March 18th, 2025, it makes it 9 years to the day since that moment.
That's crazy timing.
Castle's journey in our preseason recap video, but basically, since offing his enemies from his Black Ops team, Cerberus, including William Rollins, Schoonover, and Bill Russo, Frank Castle has been embracing his moniker as the Punisher, never fully having gotten over the murders of his
Judge, jury, executioner.
that Matt Murdock refuses to cross to kill violent murderers to send a message to anyone else who might try to do that. Matt, as an attorney, defended Frank Castle in Frank's murder trial in Daredevil Season 2, but Frank owned up to doing what he did, and he ended up getting sentenced and sent to prison, and then fought Wilson Fisk in prison, which then led to a prison riot where Frank was able to escape. And Frank,
With handcuffs on, he whooped him.
the Red that he had been fighting on the roofs of Hell's Kitchen, returned the favor to Red by sniping some warriors of the hand at the end of Season 2. The new head writer that Marvel Studios brought in to creatively overhaul this series was Dario Scardapane, who wrote on the Punisher series on Netflix, so this scene was really where he was able to shine. We see
They were
Frank
cooking with this.
suggesting he's doing a better job trying to control his anger. As he takes these pills, we see he has this patch on his arm. This is a Marine Raider Battalion patch. The Marine Raiders originally fought in the Pacific in World War II before they were decommissioned in 1940.
They be looking heavy.
The Marine Corps Special Operations Regiment in 2006. Originally, 86 Marines handpicked from the Elite Marine Force Recon, which was actually the group Frank Castle was reported to have served with in the backstory of the Netflix era shows. In 2014, this regiment was renamed the Marine Raiders in honor of the World War II Marines. This patch is depicted with a skull on a diamond surrounded by 5 stars. Matt shows Frank that the bullet casing has the skull logo. Now, for a bullet casing to have anything like this on it, and for Matt to be able to feel its texture, it would have had to have been either etched or just like burned through a brand perhaps onto the casing. And it would be very risky to tamper with a live round like that, so presumably this was done with an empty casing before that empty casing was refilled with the gunpowder and the bullet projectile. And I'm just saying that it's a lot of trouble to go through this, and that the cops who use bullets like this really wanted to send a message, especially if this casing rolled down a hill into a gutter. They wanted even Pennywise down there to know who did this. Frank says that the bullet must have belonged to some
The Punisher gang.
Matt says that, you know, you could use your
Yeah, fanboys.
of service, and using the word service really triggers Frank here.
You a service, Red?
He ain't gonna work for him.
You prance around the city in a Halloween costume, beating the snot out of bad guys. Hey, thank you for your service.
He calls him Red. Again, this kind of hostility recalls their
You gotta call him Red, bro.
Season 2, where Frank sees himself as a soldier currently in wartime and thus justified in his killing. In the back of this room is a wall of targets with several of them X'd out, showing that Frank is still on that warpath of killing murderers that he finds. I want to say the one closest to him in this shot might have been Billy Russo.
It looks like it.
This kind of has a generic look that a lot of Frank's probable targets have, and the image directly above that guy's face shows a dead body in a bathtub, like Joe Russo's character in Civil War. And being in a bathtub is not how Billy Russo was left in Punisher Season 2. Frank taunts that he thinks Matt didn't come here for Frank's help, but rather for his permission to lay his hands on someone.
You're guilty. Excuse me? Yeah. I guilt that shame. That's my home, Red.
I think we can look at this great scene as Matt finally going to a kind of Catholic confession, because since Father Lantom died in Daredevil Season 3, and now after Foggy has died, Matt has had no spiritual confidant to confess.
He needed someone to talk to.
Because he can't go to confession, he can't go to communion as a devout Catholic.
Someone to be real with him.
Over trusting the system, this episode is titled Sic Semper Systema, which is a play on the Marine phrase of Sic Semper Fidelis, or often shortened as Semper Fi, meaning always faithful. Sic Semper Systema would mean thus always to the system, as in you're always relying on the man-made systems to take care of you, even when those systems are so prone to failure. We're also reminded of the phrase Sic Semper Tyrannus, thus always to tyrants, the phrase attributed to Brutus in the assassination of Julius Caesar, and the Virginia State motto shouted by John Wilkes Booth upon shooting President Lincoln at Ford's Theater in 1865. Also interesting that it was at Lincoln Middle School where Fisk had to endure his hatred of systems in this episode. Sic Semper Tyrannis is a rallying cry against the abuse of power and a promise that tyrants will always get their comeuppance. So, thus always to systems could be a phrase that applies to what Matt Murdock and what Wilson Fisk realized this episode, that trying to walk the noble path and trusting the system will always disappoint you.
They're both going back to their old ways.
Break down that system. However, our favorite Latin expert on Twitter, who helped us out so much during Agatha, pointed out that a technically accurate Latin version of thus always to systems would actually be Sic Semper Systemati. Sic Semper Systema is really closer to the system is always like this, which I think is just
Nothing new.
how the systems of New York are always broken and unchangeable. So why even bother playing by those rules? Frank says this is really all about Foggy, and he urges Matt to say his name, coward, and then
Say his name.
break down.
Dog Steve, doesn't he? Hear his voice. Every time I start moving, I still hear my little boy. I see him.
Now, it has been confirmed that Eldon Henson will return for Daredevil Born Again Season 2.
Might be flashbacks, though.
Might be how, as a ghostly presence occupying Matt's mind, the voice of his conscience. Now, I know there was a numerical Easter egg in episode 1 hinting at
I don't think they'll bring him back for real. It's gonna be flashbacks.
more powerful presence as just this voice and vision that Frank in this scene is describing. Frank says that Bullseye gets to line up at the chow line in prison and breathe the same air that Matt does, and Matt rages.
How about old Foggy? He got life.
Frank
That was an amazing scene.
a sentence to just being a blessing, an opportunity. After Matt leaves, Frank looks off to the side, suddenly overwhelmed with emotion. I love this little nonverbal choice by John Bernthal, because it's like he's seeing and hearing his son Frank Jr. in this room, meaning that Matt's final words about Foggy being more decent than they could ever be is what stopped Frank in his tracks, stopped him moving long enough to hear his ghost son's voice. And what did that ghost son say? We built this city. I'm just kidding.
Bruh.
He's like, go get him, Dad. As in, go after and help this guy, Dad. And we will know Frank will return in a future episode based off of some set photos. So
Probably the next one.
this season, we catch up with Fisk and Vanessa. Now, last episode, they sat at opposite ends of the dinner table, kind of like the sequence in Citizen Kane that showed the disillusion of Charles Foster Kane's marriage. Now they're sitting closer together, and Fisk says,
When I was a boy.
That was a boy. The classic.
he said the thing. Now I was hoping he would say exactly what he told Dex in Daredevil Season 3.
boy.
The same, bruh.
Beat my father's skull in with a hammer.
Fisk said that he learned from his father how to move men's minds and break their bodies, but he did not learn forgiveness. That's something he learned from Vanessa. Matt catches up with Heather.
Like
Oh, they caught up for real.
and there's a bunch of people on the other side pushing it back.
He's referring to the Greek mythological Sisyphus, and also perhaps the hill, the bottle, and the bullet casing rolled down. How the forces of gravity in the city are even working against him. If only the city wasn't built on rock and roll. After a trip to Pound Town with Heather, Matt ascends to the roof while Fisk descends to his lair as we hear a church organ arrangement of John Pisano's.
They both going back to the old.
This is the rabbit in the snowstorm painting. That's the painting that symbolized the crumbling wall of his childhood home that young Wilson would have to stand and stare at while his father abused his mother. The painting that made adult Fisk feel so alone, and the first thing he bonded with Vanessa over. This painting still has the spatter of blood that stained it in the final episode of season 3 when it hung in the presidential hotel and Bullseye and Matt and Fisk all got in that bloody brawl. Meanwhile, Matt's prized exhibit is a collection of 5 masks. We saw a stray dog shot of these in the January trailer. Let's break down what these are. The first on the far right seems to be his textured red mask that he was wearing in episode 1 of the season, but this has the broken horn repaired. Maybe this is a backup mask. He did have the broken horn in an early
Gonna be ready to go in the next episode, probably towards the end.
very dark maroon one to the left of it. It's my favorite. It reminds me of his black suit that we saw Matt wearing in the animated Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man when he was also voiced by Charlie Cox, though that was in a different universe. This black mask could be inspired by the black armor in Daredevil 321 or the black suit from the Shadowland storyline. Now, the one in the middle is the throwback yellow and red design that he was wearing in Los Angeles and She-Hulk.
That one could stay away.
Red mask that I assume is the one he was wearing at the end of Daredevil season 1 and throughout Daredevil season 2. And then closest to us on the far left is a gray or bluish mask that I had some trouble identifying. As Matt uncovers his batons, we match cut to Wilson's carb-heavy dinner uncovered, ziti and sausage with peppers, a far cry from the one asparagus and egg white omelet that he ate in episode 1. And we see the recipient of Fisk's bloody knuckles.
You gotta get big.
Imprisoned behind bars in this lair, just watching as Fisk dines. Adam is played by actor Lou Taylor Pucci, who
Kingpin is sick.
in the 2005 film Thumbsucker when they were father and son. It's just kind of weird that now they're fighting over the same woman.
He put him on with the job.
Adam rattling the bars and Matt's chain on the rooftop all mixed together, and we cut to black on Matt flinging that weapon, reminding us of his fight with Nobu at the end of season 1. And then after a few seconds of black, we cut to the rattling of the passing subway cars. Muse carries his victim to his own lair that's filled
That was crazy.
with artwork. We see one figure screaming with a
He was sucking the blood out of them
Wilson's head,
so he could do them paintings.
his future victims, and we see the letters M, U, and S and E in print above, and then scratched by hand below. This figure's eyes seem to be gouged out, which reminds me of what Muse does to Blindspot in the comics. The second painting we see is a similar figure, but we see the words "the true," is it voice or victim? It just reminds me of how Matt and Frank were arguing over who the real victim is, right? And how Frank was so offended that Matt put the word victim in his mouth. But this victim sees a few corpses hanging from hooks, a woman wearing heels, another corpse to her right, and I think that's a third victim on the far right of frame.
That was crazy.
Jams a plug and a hose into this guy's body, draining him of his blood, and this will be the paint that Muse has been using for all of his artwork. Which makes me wonder, did Muse use blood in some part in the White Tigers tribute mural, or does he only
Probably
use blood
just the words.
artwork? And the specific brighter red shading of the blood here just reminds me of the bloody ooze that covered all the surfaces in New York City in the original Netflix era.
That's crazy.
Comment down below with your thoughts on this episode. Follow me at EABoss and subscribe to
But that's gonna be it. Thanks for watching. Bye. Please subscribe, like it, and comment.